I mean, honestly, what Michael Saylor's doing is incredible. I mean, he's essentially leveraging all of the current system in order to go into the new system, right? So he's using the entire fiat Wall Street arm where he's been able to accumulate just a ton of capital. Honestly, more than any of us could. I mean, me and you, Robin, could probably try to pull out as many zero interest credit cards as we possibly could to try to buy as much Bitcoin. But the scale of what we would be able to do just personally wouldn't be at the level that MicroStrategy and Michael Saylor is doing. I mean, essentially, he's pulling four levers with stretch drive, and these other two that are all kind of going through and just feeding this Bitcoin machine. So it is kind of interesting. We're recording and talking about this on the day that Strategy sold 32 Bitcoin, right? I mean, it's the market's dumping now, probably on that news because the market likes to react. But I mean, Saylor has bought in 40,000 Bitcoin the past couple of weeks. We've seen Stretch be just this product that's incredible, and there's so much demand for it. But essentially, Saylor is using the traditional financial system to pull into a lot of these just giant markets. I mean, they're $1 trillion markets that he's just going to tap into. And if he's able to just get a few percentage points, like 1 or 2%, that's doubling Bitcoin's market cap just by strategy alone. And so they're essentially just a one man machine or one company machine right now, buying up as much Bitcoin that's being mined every single day. So it's truly incredible. But essentially, the biggest driver of all of this is just Stretch. I mean, it's a preferred perpetual stock that essentially, he's paying anywhere from 10 to 13% on the month. And they're keeping it right around $100. So it's relatively flat. And, I think a lot of businesses are looking at this as more of like a money market fund. There's been a lot of talk back and forth on it, whether or not it's marketed properly. I mean, we had CoffeeZilla go on with punter Jeff or Jeff Walton here recently and kind of argued the semantics about it. But I think the funny thing about all of that and what CoffeeZilla really dove into is that he just didn't like the marketing perspective of it, right? He couldn't find, somebody that's a professional for exposing scams could not find a hole in this, except for his thought was, Bitcoin couldn't just be, I think it was like 25 or 30 million dollars in 50 years, which I mean, if you get to just an extremely low Kager, I think it's like less than 10%, then, strategy is going to be all right on paying out those dividends. But I think the biggest thing that people are missing with all of this is that, strategy is getting a lot of preferred equity or offering this preferred equity. So a lot of people are just dumping in money and he's able to use that money and pull it into Bitcoin. But, they've recently bought bonds, they've recently raised capital as well. So the dividends that they would be able to pay out essentially are at least 3 years, and Bitcoin would have to crash to like under $10,000 and be there for a long period of time in order to do that. So, strategy has essentially created this infinite money glitch where they're just able to accumulate massive amounts of Bitcoin. And, we all know when you put the infinity over the 21 million, I mean, you're just going to be able to keep accumulating and getting into that. And then eventually, when we hit that supply shock, I wouldn't be surprised if strategy is the most profitable, most powerful company in the world. And, we see the demand on the market for all these different products. So I think the financial institutions really woke up to what strategy was doing last year in 2025. The problem was just the timing for all of them, Robin. I mean, we saw, I think it was over 200 at the peak of these, traditional publicly traded companies that put Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And strategy now has had to sell Bitcoin twice in their entire existence, where a lot of them just kind of came in and bought one time and then haven't really announced another buy. But I think that there might be some more institutional buys coming in later, and maybe we can get into why I believe that here later on in this show. But yeah, if you want to dive into anything else related to strategy, I'm happy to do that, because I think what they're building is just truly incredible. And what Michael Saylor is able to do is something that I don't think will ever be replicated again.
No matter if you already have self custody or still have your Bitcoin on exchange, your generational wealth that you have in Bitcoin could be completely at risk. And that's why I highly recommend to you to give the Bitcoin Way a 30-minute free consultation call to check how secure your custody setup really is and what you can still improve. So head over to thebitcoinway.com/Robin. Again, that's thebitcoinway.com/Robin and get your free initial 30-minute call with the Bitcoin Way. I think so too. I mean, on that point, like Strive is trying it, like
Yeah.
ASSD is trying it, and they have to pay a bigger hurdle rate. They have to pay the 13%, and they now moving to daily. Let's see how well they can keep it at par. So there's a lot of like moving parts there. But do you think that Strive or like any other company for that matter could actually have some like be real competition to strategy, because currently you can't really name them as a competition?
Yeah, there's differences, right? I mean, I think the second biggest Bitcoin holder of any company has like 50 or 60,000 Bitcoin on their balance sheet, right? I mean, there's a huge difference between 50,000 Bitcoin and 800,000 Bitcoin. So, I mean, you think it's like excuse me, orders of magnitude greater now. And so as far as competition goes, I think there's going to be a lot that might pop up after this. Obviously, we've seen like I think three of the biggest 10 IPOs in the past like decade have been all from Strives or MSTRs, like preferred equities and preferred offerings, and they're just absolutely massive. So I don't think that there's going to be necessarily like a big competitor. I mean, of course, like I've kind of had the theory that Mark Zuckerberg, he could be the only one that could really do that just because of how much ownership he has of Meta. But, they have a huge technology company, right? They're going all in on AI. And I think that's kind of the recent trend. And Bitcoin has kind of lulled some people to sleep. So I think, once we start hitting this, supply shock and we start to go really parabolic and vertical, that's when we'll start to see more people come in. When in reality, as you and I know, the bear markets are for building these type of products and really just, widening the moat and being able to level a lot of the volatility. So right now, as it stands, like I couldn't see anybody really challenging him. I mean, maybe, with Tether and, Jack Mallers, their ability to raise capital, maybe they'd be able to do that. But, that would have to take Tether donating a lot of Bitcoin or moving some of the Tether Bitcoin over to 21. And I don't think that, a lot of these companies, how they started was they don't really have a profitable business underneath. Strategy has had the software business. Of course, they've kind of pivoted a little bit away from that, but they had the profitable, just steady business for a while. And that's why they were able to do this. They could raise massive amounts of debt and continually just pay that over time. And now the Bitcoin balance on their balance sheet has just gotten so big and they're able to raise so much capital that's how they're able to finance the debt. But a lot of these companies, we saw it with Naka, they're going to have to buy something like a Bitcoin magazine or some type of company like that in order to pay that debt, at least initially, because, when you don't have a lot of Bitcoin on the balance sheet, it's going to be difficult to pay that debt over time without selling. And then if you sell that Bitcoin, you're going to see a massive dip in the stock price. And that's kind of what we're seeing right now with Strategy when, like we said, at the beginning, they only sold 32 Bitcoin, but everybody's rising up in flames and freaking out about, this sale of 32, just because, of how Saylor's essentially marketed himself in Strategy over time of like never sell Bitcoin and all of these different tactics. But the mechanics behind what Strategy is building, I don't think can be replicated simply because of the massive amount of moat that they have, where, they're going to get to 1 million Bitcoin. I would put my money on it, that they're going to get to 1 million Bitcoin by the end of the year, even with this road bump, let's call it, of selling 32 coins in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, they had weeks where they raised 30,000 Bitcoin, 40,000 Bitcoin. I think like around 30 to 40,000 was the biggest week they had this year so far. So selling 32 Bitcoin, I mean that the math is kind of looking really nice, because if they can raise 10 Bitcoin, they can sell one to cover the dividends and they gain 9 Bitcoin. That's how I kind of look at it. Like, they have to sell Bitcoin at some point. And they did it already before, I think in 2022, at like 20 Bitcoin or so for some tax purposes. And I think this is also a tax purpose long term, because they can sell some high cost 126K Bitcoin at like 70K, and have the put the tax loss on the balance sheet and basically get free Bitcoin in the long run. So they should use the balance sheet. They should do those things. And I'm still in my learning process. I'm gaining more and more confidence in the strategy stock. I'm gaining more and more exposure on the common shares also, and so I'm quite bullish on them, but I'm still learning. Like, I don't want to come out too bullish or too bearish yet, because I'm still learning. There's so much, like, strategy is a complex thing, but potentially like a huge engine for your own portfolio.
Yeah, and I mean, just personally, I think a lot of people who hold Bitcoin on the balance sheet have gotten into a little bit of trouble here lately. I mean, we're seeing it in a lot of these institutions already, right? I mean, Nakamoto's one, and a few others that essentially bought the top and saw it all crash. I mean, for me as a small business owner, I mean, something like Stretch is actually pretty advantageous, because you could get 10 to 13% paid out monthly, dividends on there, and it stays relatively flat. Maybe you go down by $1 or $2, or up $1 or $2 on each share, but they've been able to keep that relatively flat. So I think from like a business owner's perspective, or like I said, the people that are looking for more of the money market funds, why would you go into government bonds that we know are just like 4% at this point, and then you're going to be losing, because we all know inflation's running hot around 7%. So you're just guaranteeing you're going to lose 3%. Of course, that's a little bit better than losing the, close to 7% if you just had it sitting in a bank account. So I think more people are going to be looking at this. And I mean, I know, Strive is actually putting some Stretch on their balance sheet as well as Bitcoin, just because they're like, hey, we'll buy into this big giant engine. So I wouldn't be surprised if we actually see some more companies looking at that as well, because, once it becomes more of a proven thing, and I think more of these institutions get a little bit more comfortable with Stretches out for a longer period of time, that's where we're going to see a lot of the money coming in. And, I think at the end of the day, right? I mean, Stretch strategy, all the things that they're doing is relatively new. Bitcoin is still relatively new, right? I mean, Bitcoin is not even legal to drink in most countries at this point, right? I mean, some countries it's not even legal to drive. So I think, everybody is getting just lulled to death and think that they missed the boat on Bitcoin, missed the boat on strategy. I think we're just getting started, Robin. I think we're still extremely early, and I think when you look at the numbers for everything, right? I mean, I just can't see how long term you can be bearish. I mean, sure, maybe in the short term we're going to see some volatility, but we see volatility with everything, right? I mean, if you compare it to a certain tech stock, maybe this tech stock and this AI boom has beaten Bitcoin or beaten strategy. But at the end of the day, when you hold this for a long period of time, there's very few things that you're going to beat on Bitcoin. And I think it's one of the safest investments you can make. Obviously, not financial advice or anything like that. But I think, when you just look at the numbers, the fixed supply, you don't have to worry about any CEO risk or anything like that. Bitcoin's the way, right? And Saylor has learned that. And I think Saylor might be running into a little bit of his own conviction early on troubles here by just saying he would never sell or anything like that. And then now people are kind of, like I said, going at him a little bit just for selling these 32. But when you look at the numbers, right, I mean, like we said, they bought 30,000 Bitcoin multiple times in a week this past or during this year, and they sold 32. And that's the headline, right? That's the big thing where everybody's like, what the hell is going on? Why is Saylor selling this amount? But when you look at the percentages, right? I mean, it's like what, 0.01% of what they've bought in a single week, or maybe even less than that. I'm doing quick math here, so maybe fact check me in the comments. But I mean, it's a very small percentage here of what they're building out. So I mean, at the end of the day, when you have 800,000 Bitcoin and Bitcoin goes up by, a couple percentage points, they'll be making billions of dollars in single days just because of a few percentage points increase on Bitcoin. So I think what he's doing is extremely smart. And to be honest, I don't think the market even knows. So I wouldn't give yourself too much of a hard time here, Robin, because I think, this is just a very new product for everybody. And I think the interesting thing is a lot of Bitcoiners maybe had a sour taste in the market. I mean, I know I did. When we saw the GameStop boom in 2020, I was looking at all these things. I was a Bitcoin maxi for sure, but maybe not full fledged, just all in on Bitcoin at that time. And you see GameStop run up, and I was like, what the hell? This market is extremely manipulated. We're seeing oil go crazy right now. We're seeing a bunch of AI stocks be extremely overvalued. And I think, when you look at how the mechanics of the market is working, I think that it just hasn't been priced in yet how much of a moat they have on this whole Bitcoin thing when it comes to putting it on the balance sheet. And it's still a relatively new process, right? Strategy's just been doing it for 6 years. They're launching a lot of these preferreds within the last 1 to 2 years, and it's new. And one thing that I've learned about Wall Street, the government, everything, when something is new, they need to cross their T's and dot their I's and make sure that they have their bases covered before they really start to go in. But once people start to figure this thing out, I mean, that's when we're off to the races, to say the very least.
Yeah, I just calculated quickly, like 32 Bitcoin is 0.03 per mil of the whole stack. So what is it? 0.000 or like 0.003 percent of the whole stack, which is like obviously nothing, considering they're buying tens of thousands of Bitcoin usually. But I think what this might also be is just testing the waters. Like, I think Saylor is just actively trying, hey, let's just sell 32 Bitcoin. Let's see how the market reacts. Let's see how the strategy common shares react, the stretch shares react, and how Bitcoin price reacts. I think he's just literally running an experiment at that week. Thank you for watching this video. This was only a snippet of the podcast. And if you want to watch the full episode and get all of the context of this episode, you can click right here or here. Oh, maybe also here.